Hello and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here. I'm Alison J. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, like the videos and share. Today, we'll be speaking with Andra Love about breaking unhealthy cycles and healing from abusive relationships and trauma. Andra is a qualified social worker, an author, relationship and singles coach. She recently wrote the book, I Want to Know What Love Is. The book was inspired by Andra's own personal love journey and survival from years in abusive relationships and how her experiences eventually caused her to triumph and break unhealthy cycles. The book will provoke you into breaking cycles and discovering your own love journey and relationship blueprint. Andra's mission is simply to propel women into healthy, lasting relationships. She wants to see women healed from their past trauma and brokenness, wanting to empower couples to discover their love languages and to establish a relationship that is free from abusive patterns. A quote from Andra's book: "Love is complex. Only until you understand the concept of love, then you can understand the language it speaks." Hello, Andra. Thank you so much for joining us here on Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here. I am so excited to speak to you today, having known you for so many years and then reading your story, the journey that you went through, how you went through some very traumatic experiences and the road that took you through those experiences that led to your healing. So another reason why I'm so excited to speak to you, because I think it will help so many people to stop just going through the motions in relationships, to stop going through traumatic cycles and breaking those negative patterns and those cycles and really coming through to healing. And also not just healing, but also learning how to love themselves so that they can then heal and give healthy love to themselves and to others. So, Andra, you wrote a book, I Want to Know What Love Is. What prompted you to write the book and why? And I just wanted to let you know, show you, I have my copy here. I Want to Know What Love Is. It is a great read. From the moment I picked it up, I didn't put it down until I was finished. And as I mentioned to you, I had 7 pages of notes that I took in wanting to speak to you today. So, Andra, please. In your own words, if you wanted to tell us a bit about the book and what led you to write the book, and really also why now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the book was inspired by my survival of being in years of abusive relationships. And when I say abusive, I mean sometimes it was physical, mental, and sometimes financial. And what prompted me to write the book was I experienced a really traumatic breakup in 2018. And the trauma that I faced, I kind of felt, why am I here? Over and over again, this unhealthy cycle of breakups, of unhealthy relationships. I was tormented around what was causing this unfortunate cycle. And I remember lying down in the bed and I had the radio on and this song came on by Mariah Carey, I Want to Know What Love Is. And straight away, a whole load of emotions took me over. I didn't know what it was. Was it I didn't know what love was, or I wanted it so badly? What was it? And I really sat there and I said, I actually don't know what love is. I actually have never felt loved. And then that caused me to go right back into, the very beginning of my relationships. I started to get flashbacks around, the abuse and all of these things. And then it's like the Lord just said, you need to write a book. You need to write this book about everything that you've been through and got through. And I kind of felt overwhelmed with that. And I was like, well, writing a book, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what love is. But I felt that it was time. It was time to write this book, and it was time that, I discovered what love is.
Thank you so much for that. And something very key that you said, you don't know what love is. You don't know if you've actually felt love in the relationship sense, because we're not talking about love from our parents or our family. That's a whole different conversation for a different podcast, right? But we're talking about in that relationship sense. And when we think about it, what is love really even? And it can mean so many things to so many different people. And you mentioned going through various forms of abuse. You mentioned domestic violence. You mentioned emotional. And it's interesting you mentioned financial abuse, something that I've never really thought of, but it is actually a real thing when you're the one that's parting with money or the person's being irresponsible with it. We don't look at it as a form of abuse, but really it is. So thank you so much for touching on that, because so many people can possibly now take a look and think, actually, yes, this is a form of abuse and we need to stop this cycle. We need to stop this. So thank you. And I don't want to give too much away of the book because I want people to go and buy it and read it. It's available on Amazon. So shameless plug there. But you, as you mentioned, went through a few very abusive relationships at a young age as well. And what do you think that not only kept you staying in them when you did for as long as you did, but what kept you also going from one abusive relationship into another?
Okay, so that's a very good key question here, because when I coach women, I always try to take them back to their blueprint. What is your blueprint in relationships? And I discovered that my blueprint was actually healing from one relationship meant that I was going into another one. So that other relationship would make me forget about the other one, which only made me go from hurt to hurt to hurt because I never really addressed the pain. So what you then come up with, and that's where you create the cycle. The cycle of abuse is actually you're abusing yourself because you've never given yourself that time to heal. You've never really discovered what your patterns are in relationships. And I started to delve into some clinical research around attachment styles. And I was really intrigued by it because one, I wanted to know what my attachment style was in relationships and also how I could heal using that kind of methodology. And I discovered some clinical research about the 4 different types of attachment styles. So you've got your avoidant attachment, you've got your anxious attachment, you've got disorganized, and you've got secure. So I thought, okay, so where do I fit into this? And when I did the test, I fell into the anxious attachment style. And the anxious attachment style, many women or even men fall into that when they prioritize that relationship above everything that's going on around them. So these types of people will invest so much in the relationship out of the fear of being rejected. And I know that my earlier relationships were categorized by rejection, as you know, in terms of, especially with the relationship with my daughter's dad. So that kind of carried on, that you would do over and above just to sustain that relationship. Then you got the avoidant type of attachment style, where those are the types of people that you'll have a great time with. You'll have a great night, you'll have a great week, and then as soon as you've gone home, you probably won't hear from them for a week. And that triggers back the person who's anxious into that anxious state. Avoidant people have trouble committing to the relationship out of fear of losing, their independence, so to speak, or their freedom. And then you've got the secure. The secure, they pretty much are, they're the sassy people. They're the ones that they're not fazed by anything. They're the ones that they can hold down a relationship and hold down a job, and they're not, jealous type or anything like that. That's where everybody needs to be. But even if you are in that kind of secured state, if you date somebody who's in the avoidant, you could quickly go back over to being anxious. So you can be quite fluid between the different, the different types of attachment styles. And then the disorganized is obviously the one that flip between the avoidant and the anxious. So they flip between the two. And then I was discovering I've pretty much been in the anxious sort of attachment style throughout most of my relationships, going over and above, beyond, and staying in that relationship because I didn't want to ever feel that sense of rejection.
That's interesting. And sorry, can you please repeat those avoidance styles? Because something you said in, I think it was the avoidance attachment style that made me think of, are they the kind of people that I'm going to break up with you before you break up with me? That kind of thing.
It's most definitely that type of and those people also, they struggle with intimacy. They struggle with the I love yous. They struggle with saying anything that will trigger you into thinking that they're committing to you. So you have that good time, you can vibe with them, you can have an amazing time, but then you go home, they go home, and then they haven't called you, and you're thinking, well, what have I done? And then you start to slip into this anxious kind of state, and then you're trying to catch up. You try to call them, they haven't answered the phone, and you can't think of what you've done. It's important for women, especially, and I'm speaking about women, and I know this does apply to men as well, but it's important for us to understand the attachment styles of our partners or future partners, because then you can pick up a red flag very quickly and you can avoid getting into a relationship with somebody who's not your match in terms of the attachment style. But it doesn't mean if you're with somebody in a relationship now and there's those issues going on in there that it can't fix. It can fix, but you both have to have that consciousness that this is where you're operating from, and this is where we need to get to. So it's about the communication about those styles and understanding your partner's attachment styles along the way.
Yes. And you mentioned knowing your partner's attachment style, but really we need to learn our own as well, because as you're mentioning attachment styles, I'm thinking, I wonder what mine is. Having not gone through that, you mentioned it was like a questionnaire that you felt that you went through to know about attachment styles. I was thinking that's interesting, because if we know what our attachment styles are prior to getting into relationships, then we possibly may avoid some of the pitfalls that we do when we meet someone, because we can recognize what an attachment style is. Many of us never even heard that before. Is that right?
Absolutely. And that's the state I was in. I mean, I did hear about attachment styles because I am a qualified social worker, and we use attachment styles in, the parent-child relationship, but I never knew about it in terms of an actual, intimate relationship, that there was actually this big clinical research about it. So that caused me to really delve deep into it. And, some of the researchers will refer to the fact that how you were raised, sometimes that can influence how you will be in the relationship. Because if you were never shown love, never shown affection, it's going to be very difficult for you to maneuver into a secured kind of attachment style. Yeah, so I find that there's lots to dig into in terms of the attachment styles, and I guess the blueprint for me started there, and that's where I came to this kind of intrigue more into the clinical kind of research around relationships.
And you're mentioning looking at, excuse me, the parent-child relationship, because what a lot of people don't realize, and I think a lot of us put it down to just being a cliche, when you see you watch a movie and the person's going to therapy, and one of the first questions are like, so what's the relationship like with your parents? And everybody thinks that's actually some kind of cliche, but they don't realize that the foundation of our emotional makeup is actually done. I think I was reading a study, and I believe it was something like 80% or 80 or 85% of our emotional well-being and our emotional intelligence is actually done and created before we're even 10 years old.
Absolutely.
So it actually does lead into, yes, what was that relationship like with your parents? Because your emotional foundation, 85% of it is actually already there and in place at such an early age. So it's so we really should stress and emphasize, don't disregard that. And if there's anything that's going on, any traumas or anything like childhood traumas, we need to really address and deal with them so that we can start to then love as healthy adults, right? Exhibit healthy love.
Absolutely. I totally 100% agree with that. And it's funny because I do mention in the book where I sat down with one of my previous managers and we was talking about relationship and breakup, and I was going through a divorce and everything, and she said to me, Andra, when you meet a man, you have to look at the relationship he had with his mother or his parents before you can get into a relationship with him, because that is going to be a benchmark for you as how he's going to treat a woman. And let's not disregard the fact that we know that, today, particularly in modern times, a lot of single parenthood families exist. And it does not mean that those single, parent families will not experience the love and, the two parent families. So I'm not trying to discriminate against any particular family type. But what I am saying is the relationship that you have with your child that will ultimately be the benchmark for them developing healthy attachments when they get older into adulthood. So we have to really look at our own relationships with our parents and the family as well, because the family does make up, a huge percentage of that percentage you were speaking about. And it's really important that those early relationships are dealt with healthily, are dealt with robustly in terms of some people, and I do talk about the love languages as well, as well as the attachment styles. I talk about the love languages, because you do have some people who will love to give hugs and the cuddles, and some people don't like it. It doesn't mean that person doesn't love you any less. It's not a form of affection they're comfortable with. And I do remember being in a relationship with somebody and he would be just very touchy-feely, and it really it irritated me, I have to say. And and I didn't mean it in an offensive way, but it became so irritating, and I had to even unravel that for myself and say, well, Andra, why did you find that so irritating? What is it about physical touch? And obviously there are some traumatic things that happened that I explain in the book, and I realized it was as a result of that trauma that was actually putting the wall up in terms of the intimacy, etc. So, and I think the book for me, it allows women to discover their own journey, and then it prompts them into finding a healthier balance in terms of creating that lasting relationship. Because a lot of the time in breakups, I often blamed myself.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't affectionate. I didn't do enough. I could have done this. I could have said that. When actually it's a two-way situation. And I think, if you understand your partner's love language and they understand yours, then I think that's the road to a healthy relationship.
Thank you. That is interesting. Understanding your love language and understanding each other's love language as well. I made a note to touch on love languages later on in our conversation. So thank you so much for giving us a little teaser as to what that is. Now, one of the things that I really wanted to ask you, and not just because you've gone through traumatic abusive relationships and come out the other end, because you're a social worker, because you coach women in relationships, many times when we on the outside looking in, we see someone in a relationship and they've experienced being manipulated, being under heavy manipulation, being in a relationship where the partner's extremely controlling. Now, again, reading the book and looking on, people might say, come on, surely you can see what's going on and get out, right? But really, it's not that simple though, is it?
It's not that simple. And I think that was one of the difficulties with me seeking help, was because I felt that I was in a ridiculous cycle. I felt that I was so entrenched in it. If I was to tell anybody what I was going through, they would say, well, surely you can just not let them back in, or you can, you can just move on. What's the issue? Why are you stuck? And I think that's another thing in writing this book and exploring my own blueprint, was I was actually stuck in a trauma bond situation. And, you know, the trauma bond, if you look at people who have been kidnapped, and many movies out there, I'm sure you would have seen some of them, where you can see that the person can just run. And you're on the TV watching, saying, get out the car, get out the car. The person's there, you can move, you can move. And the person looks at the door open and looks back, and they will not move because they are stuck in Stockholm syndrome kind of thing. And I think that's what happens to a lot of women. We become into these relationships, we become stuck. And I mean, it was one after the other for me. It was one after the other for me. And I believe some part of me became desensitized by what I was actually in, until I kind of had that revelation or that epiphany in 2018, where I had to really roll it back and strip back everything to find out what is this pattern and how can I overcome this unfortunate cycle.
And you mentioned Stockholm syndrome. So for our listeners, can you explain what is Stockholm syndrome and how does it apply to relationships?
So for me, Stockholm syndrome, basically, it's the trauma bond. So it's a relationship between the abductor and obviously the victim. So you become so bonded with that, your abductor, you cannot escape. You cannot leave. So you're stuck. You're frozen. If that's a better word, you're frozen in that kind of cycle of being the victim. They could go to shopping and they could leave the front door open. You could see somebody pass and you could scream for help, but you become frozen enough that you can't even utter the word help. And I kind of put that together with the domestic violence that I was going through. There were many opportunities. I mean, I've got a big family. As you know, I've got a big family. There's people that I could have called to come and rescue me out of that situation. And I didn't. I felt that if I had done that, I would have failed, if it's particularly in my marriage. I would have not achieved what my ultimate goal was, and that was a healthy family relationship and a father for my daughter. And I think those things took me over. Being a young mum, you know, getting pregnant in my late teens and having a daughter and not having a father, I was driven to just have that two-parent family for my daughter at whatever cost. And it cost me a lot.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the explanation for the Stockholm syndrome and going into your marriage, because that's actually the next thing that I wanted to touch on. You getting married and having what I just refer to as, a lot of it is internal pressure, because we think that people are looking at us thinking, oh, well, you were a teenage mom and your daughter doesn't have a father, so you need to get married and you need to have the 2.5 kids and you need to have the house with the white picket fence and the cat, the dog, and the car and all of that. And when realistically, people may not be saying that to us. That's just what we think the norm is and what we should be doing. And now, when it comes to your marriage, and you mentioned this in the book, for those of us that grew up in the church, because you and I, we did grow up in the church, that's how we know each other. Because many times, and I've heard this many times, that somebody says that they get a scripture and they try to make that scripture fit what it is that they actually want, right? And I remember a dear friend of mine, he got married. And a few years later, we hadn't spoken for ages. And then, you know, he just popped up and I'm like, oh gosh, I wonder if he was all right, because he was just like heavily on my mind. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I wonder if he's all right. So I called him and I said, so how's everything going? How's your wife? How's your family? And he said that he and his wife are split up. And I'm like, I was quite upset for him, thinking, oh no. But then the next thing he said to me was, Alison, many times we just want what we want, and then we just want God to rubber stamp it. Like, wow. Okay. Like, wow. That was so profound. And then reading your book brought that back to my mind, that there's so many times that we pick up the Bible and we read a scripture and we just want to interpret it anyhow we want. Yeah, so for you, you mentioned in the book, that's something similar to what you did. So how does, looking back on it now, what would you have done differently, and how has that experience shaped you, and what did you actually learn from that with regards to trying to interpret something that you've read, whether it be in the Bible or anywhere else, to try and make it fit your circumstance?
I guess, you know what, I've had this conversation with somebody, I think even last weekend. I think a lot of the times, if we really think about it, we often marry people for other people. Sometimes we're not marrying the person who we want. We're marrying, especially if we're in the church, as you mentioned, especially if we're in the church, you're going to marry that person that fits that description of not being unevenly yoked. And I see a lot of women, and I'm sure you have, end up marrying a beast. And I did speak about marrying the beast in the book, because you get that pressure from the congregation, the pastor, and everybody else, that you should be marrying somebody who is quote unquote saved. Yeah. And so you look for that person who's saved, and you're missing the character that's in front of you that may not be the character for you just because they're in the church. So you're not marrying somebody who perhaps you've met in Sainsbury's or something like that, because they don't fit the box of where, it's very prescribed in the Christian kind of faith that you have to marry somebody who is quote unquote a believer. For me at that time, I wasn't marrying a believer. I wasn't completely baptized at that time when I got married. So I wasn't looking for a scripture to justify it. I was more looking at the circumstances in which this person could fit into my life, and we could have that commitment. But as we were, I think, yeah, after I got married, that's when I became baptized, because I was journeying in my Christian faith alongside the journeying towards a healthy relationship. And I think the worlds collided. And for me, when I do coach women, especially Christian women, I find it a lot that some Christian women have missed out on some beautiful relationships, beautiful, beautiful men that they could have been with, because they have put themselves in a box around not being judged. And I'm not saying that, pastors and Christian people, Christian congregation, they're wrong for trying to protect somebody from, because that's ultimately what the goal is to protect that person from, divorce or going to, because you can't really marry somebody, you're in the church and they're in the world. How is that going to work? When do you come together? When, there's got to be some common there's got to be some common denominator going on in terms of that relationship. But for me, I definitely wasn't looking for the scripture to kind of confirm the relationship. I was on my own journey, and I just wanted that kind of thing. But going along and reading this book, and also speaking to women who's read my book, I would say that a lot of the times women are marrying for somebody else, especially if you're a pastor's daughter, especially if your parents are high up in the church. You are going to marry somebody who fits their box rather than yours. And I think that's one of the difficulties that Christian women in particular face.
You just brought something back to my mind there in what you were saying when you said that we don't necessarily marry for ourselves, but we marry for other people to check this imaginary checklist, so to speak, right? And I remember when I was 19, I was dating this guy, really, really lovely guy. And I remember the pastor coming to visit us at home and telling me to marry him. I'm like, wait, what? I'm 19. Why would I want to get married at 19, kind of thing? And he was just going on and really almost, I felt like browbeating me into marrying this guy. Like I said, it's not because there wasn't anything wrong with the guy why I wouldn't want to marry him. It was more because I was 19 and the person I was dating was only 2 years older than me. So I remember saying to him, I was thinking, hold on, you've got a son that's 2 years older than me. He's not married and he's got a child. So I remember, because I've always been a little bit too upfront. And I remember I leaned in and I said to him, so when you tell your son to go and get married, come back and see me, and then I'll get married. I actually remember saying that to him because I just thought the audacity of it. I'm only 19. I felt like I would have been like a child bride. Now, don't get me wrong, there are many people that have married young and it's worked for them. It's been great, but it wasn't what felt right for me because I just felt like 19. Good Lord. What would I wouldn't know what to do with a whole husband at 19 years old kind of thing. I knew what to do with a boyfriend, but I didn't know what to do with a whole husband.
Exactly, but I think those types of messages is kind of where I was kind of alluding to, is that often we are told, or younger women are told to marry the person that they're with because of the sex, because obviously the intimacy, let's use the word intimacy, because of the intimacy that is likely to be going on, everybody thinks it's safer to just get married. And then that's when you've ended up marrying the beast because you never really got to know the person. But because of the physical side that perhaps maybe you might be weak in that area, that can kind of propel you into marrying the wrong person because you don't want to be out of God's will whilst you're having that kind of intimate relationship. And I think that's the danger that we have. And that's why I do want my kind of experiences to be in the church and to, educate others around safe relationships, around having the open discussions in the church arena, in women's group, in men's group, whatever group, young people's groups. We have to have these discussions.
What you said there just brought another thing back to mind. Whereas I think by this time, so if we press the fast forward button, I was in my late 20s and I saw somebody from church, somebody that we got on great. And by this time he was married. I think he had a couple of children. I was like, oh my gosh, where have you been? And so, you just start talking and catching up on old times. I was, I used to really like you. Like, well, you never said anything. So, and I said, but you're married now anyway. So, and then he goes, yeah, it's better to marry than to burn. I'm like, wait, what? Now, many people might not know that that is actually a scripture that says it's better to marry than to burn with, I believe it's like the desire of lust. So to your point about many people getting married because the church, so to speak, is trying to protect them from falling into like the danger zone of sexual intimacy kind of thing. And I'm thinking, well, if that's why you got married for all the wrong reasons. And to your point about people getting married, just because somebody's in the church does not mean that they're saved. Let's just put that all the way out there. It doesn't, because unfortunately, we've heard of instances where people that were saved in the church were ended up beating up their spouse. Their spouse had to be rescued. And I've had multiple stories of that. And it's not just the physical abuse, there's also infidelity. And there's just so many things that you hear as coming out of some of these marriages where people were kind of pushed together to be married. And really, as a result of that, so many things happened that led to that couple being divorced. So to your point about people really marrying for other people, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Exactly that. And I think this is why I'm saying it's very important that we understand our blueprint before we go into relationships, because then that will kind of, break that kind of unhealthy pattern of not looking at the character. There's a lot of, I don't want to use the word hypocrites, but there's a lot of, people in the church who, because they're married, they suddenly forget the uncomfortableness of sometimes being single and still having those urges, still wanting, you still want that intimacy. That's your love language and you're not getting it. So then you start to crave unhealthy patterns. And, I think it's very important that we open up the discussion around intimacy.
Yeah. 100%. And I think as well, if we were having some of these open conversations, especially those of us that grew up in the church, maybe them that's we may not have lost so many young people to, because I know that when we were growing up, and it may not be, I'm not fully well versed in how it is now, but I know that when we were growing up, a lot of us were very, very naive and green. And so you had some of these, back then we used to call them these roadmen, right? They smooth talking, charming. Then you've got these very green, naive church girls. And then they've in one environment or another come into contact with them. And I can tell you this, I remember, so a dear friend of mine, who's passed away now, was a chef. And I used to work with him a lot. And we did a funeral in North London. Now, this funeral was for older people. I think I'm saying older because I'm probably close to that age range now, but we're saying like late 60s, 70s kind of thing. And I remember going around with the food and serving. And let me tell you something, Andra love. These men, let me rephrase that. These men, they had some chat. They had lyrics. And now this time, I'm grown at this point, because I think by this point, I'm like in my 30s. I'm not naive and I'm not green. By this point, I'd left the church, lived a life, been in the clubs, you name it, right? So it's not that I was at this point green or naive. But I listen to these men, and now many people tell me I don't look my age. So if that's the case, and I remember I had on like a white blouse, black trousers, hair in a ponytail, fresh face, and I'm thinking, this could potentially be how some of these young girls, some of these very naive green young girls in the church got swooped off their feet. Because some of these guys, I'm telling you, they have the talk. They listen. And like I said, I was growing in my 30s and I was there clutching my twin set and pearls at some of the things they were saying to me. I was like, oh, what? I was a little shook. So to your point of having these conversations, and I'm not saying that we need to go in depth and be graphic and be deep about it, but just bring some level of awareness so that we're not really setting up our young people for a fall when it comes to somebody approaching them and talking and saying whispering all these sweet nothings, as they say, in their ear. Next thing you know, we're losing people, and then people are getting caught up and bound in these abusive relationships, especially some of these young girls that are getting into relationships with some of these older men.
Absolutely, because some of those relationships is clearly a power imbalance. You know, some decisions that you can make as an adult, a child can't make those decisions. And when I say that, you see in the media all the time where the married man has gone with an 18-year-old. That 18-year-old doesn't have that level of maturity or life experience to understand the detrimental decision they've made to be in that kind of relationship, both spiritually, mentally, physically, all of those things. The impact is huge. I think that's where a power imbalance is, because you're older, you're maturer, you've got the life experience, you can make that decision, and you'd probably be more aware of consequences than the 18-year-old or the younger person.
Yeah, that is so true. Yeah. So we really need to have these conversations with our young people.
Yeah.
And something that you mentioned in the book, now you've spoken about the trauma bond cycle before, but you also go on to talk about self-blame. And you also go on to talk about that being something that kind of kept you bound and in these relationships. Do you want to tell us a bit more about the self-blame and how you went through that?
Yeah, so I think for me, you know what, and I think maybe I probably touched on that in terms of the financial abuse as well.
Mm.
The self-blame, constantly catching up, constantly filling in the gap if they needed money and stuff like that. Because I was somebody very career-driven. Nobody would ever know that this was happening to me at home because at work I'm getting promoted. I'm the bee's knees. I'm the talked about one. There's everything about Andra is good at work. Everything, I'm changing my car all the time. So who would think that somebody who's quite intelligent in a prominent job, all of these things will be happening? And I blamed myself if things went wrong, and that's where I spoke about the anxious kind of attachment. The fear of being rejection kind of drove me into what could I do to improve myself, what could I do to make this better, rather than me looking at how can we make this better, or how can he make enhance my life, rather than why am I enhancing his. The self-blame was very real for me. It was very, very real, and it was very painful, because that's when you have low self-image, you've got low self-esteem. You don't your life expectancy in the relationship isn't that long, because you're expecting that in 2 years it's going to be like this or this and this. And I realized that I had a lot of self-sabotaging thoughts that contributed to the self-blame.
Thank you. And I think when we look at it and we think about it, many of us have possibly even been there, because you mentioned winning at work. You to everyone looking, you're doing great, right? On the outside, you're checking all of the boxes. You've got the good job, check. You've got the marriage, check. You've got the child, check, right? But yeah, you dread going home, because it's held behind closed doors, for want of a better expression. And your life, your personal life, is literally falling apart and burning to the ground. But on the outside, you're doing great, right? I mean, emotionally and mentally, what did that do for you? Because you also mentioned that you were just existing in survival mode.
Yeah. So yeah. You see, the thing, when you think about survival mode, for me, survival mode was keeping my head above the water. I was like, if I look down, I'm gonna drown. But if I keep my head up, I'm gonna survive. And a lot of the times in some of those relationships, I was just existing. And I was so entrenched in it, I couldn't come out. I couldn't see a way out, because obviously I had my goals in that relationship as well. I wanted more children. I had one daughter, and I wanted, I didn't want to, I wanted to have definitely maybe about 6 or 7 children. I just love children. Yeah, I just love children. So, that was my goal: get pregnant, have another baby, and as I do talk about the loss of a baby in the book. So obviously that kind of was that drive to get that baby back. And I think that was one of my main reasons for staying in some of those relationships, particularly my marriage. That was particularly one of the goals that I wanted to achieve so badly.
But not only that, the thing is, nobody gets married to get divorced.
No,
So you are
no.
going to do what for the most part, most of us, we will try to do everything we can to save our marriage, even if, as I mentioned earlier, it means on the outside, everything looks great, but you go home, you shut the door, and it's held behind closed doors. So I think that's an understandable thing to want to say to fight your marriage. However, not at the cost of your safety, your sanity, or anything like that. And the interesting thing with this is you may think that you're doing all the right things to hide it from people. And you think you're doing an excellent job just because nobody said anything to you. But you're there thinking that, okay, the abuse, the emptiness, I'm hiding it. But I think sometimes we'd be surprised to once we come out the other end and we start sharing that people are like, yeah, I kind of knew something was going on. And you just thought to yourself, well, how? Because I thought I was doing this amazing job by hiding it, right?
Exactly. And I think for me, a lot of the times if somebody did allude to it, I would immediately shut them down. So I wouldn't allow them to cross that boundary with me to say, are you okay with X, Y, Z? I don't want to call any names, but are you all right with that person? Because I felt I'm not going to let you in. I'm going to be guarded about what's happening. And I guess sometimes people won't push into that because in the Black community as well, especially Jamaican community, there's this thing about not getting involved in men and women's argument, as it would be. It's about, because when pillow talk, they will turn around and talk about the person who was trying to save them. So there's a secret code not to get involved in other people's relationships. And I think that's what's allowed a lot of domestic violence situations to exist. You don't get involved in men and women's argument. That is a prominent saying in Jamaican culture. So
Yeah.
if you who's going through a domestic violence situation and you tell that person to back off, they're gonna back off.
But yeah, that is true because I can't save you if you don't want to be saved, right?
Right. No. No.
And something else that you put in your book that I thought was very profound, which maybe we don't even pay enough attention to. And it says, all being in this relationship costs. Will it cost you your peace, your joy, your salvation, your sanity, and in some cases, your family? And when I read that, what came to mind was that many times we get into these relationships, and the truth is, I believe that sometimes, not all, but sometimes there are a few red flags that are shown from the very beginning, and we see the bad behavior, but in the beginning, it's cute. It's cute. Like, for example, you're in a relationship and he's always buying you clothes. Yeah, don't get me wrong. Sometimes that is nice. But then when it gets to the stage of he's buying you clothes, but you can only wear the clothes that he buys, that's something that you need to pay attention to. But I think with many of us that we actually fool ourselves into thinking that we're the chosen one. We're the one that can save them. We're the one that can cause them to turn all this bad behavior into good behavior. We're the one that can turn them and make them turn their lives around and make them do this complete 180. Now, the truth is, we're not. More than likely, we're not. And we need to stop fooling ourselves that we can swoop in and be these saviors to help turn these people from these terrible abusive behaviors. Because I've only seen, and there could be more, but in my experience, I've only seen two things happen as to why somebody's drastically turned their life around. And it is an intervention by God.
Amen.
There's been some really detrimental, life-changing happening or event that's occurred in their lives. Those are the only two times I've seen somebody really, really do a 180 in their behavior. Now, what would you say to someone who has that savior complex and thinks that if I just love them enough, or if I can just be enough for them, or if I can just do all the things that they need me to do, then they'll change, then they'll love me better because I can just love all the bad behavior away. It reminds me of that what's it, Eric Benet song, Love the Hurt Away. We believe that we can love the bad behavior away, we can love it out of them. So what are your thoughts on that to help someone break free from those cycles of having that savior complex?
First thing I would ask the person is, why do you feel the need to rescue? Because is there something within you that has not been rescued that you're driving, because I believe I was so much a rescuer. I was taking up the bad, the really bad, and thinking that I could build them up and change them, just like you described. But where has that need and desire to rescue someone come from? That's what I need to understand. In order to give you the tools to make sense of it, I need to understand why you feel that you need to rescue this person. Because when you for those relationships, you are acting as a rescuer. You know, I hate to put it like this, but you're rescuing stray dogs and fixing them up and whatever, and then they go away once you fix them up. Once you've beautified them, they've gone. Now, why do you still need to do that? Because in a sense, you're chasing the high. You've got to accomplish. You're not feeling accomplished because all the ones that you've rescued before haven't stayed. And that's something that you'd have to unpick, because being a rescuer, I can tell you, it's exhausting. It's taxing. Yeah, and you're only going to end up in a more vulnerable state of in fact, you're going to find yourself more vulnerable, because now that person has hurt you on top of you trying to do the good. So there is nothing that you can do to rescue anyone who does not want to be rescued, because they're just using you as a crutch until they have, achieved what they need to achieve. I had a conversation with somebody, this guy, and he said to me, quite frankly, he used to have loads and loads of women. So I said, so how come you're settling down with this one? And he quite frankly said to me, the reason he's settling down with this one is because she doesn't ask too many questions. And I was blown away. He said he goes home every night, he's with this one, and she does not ask him too much. Where are you? Whatever. There's no nagging. She don't check his phone. It's just that one thing that's turned this man to being faithful, is this woman doesn't talk too much. So you can't call it. You can't call it. But what I would say to somebody is, you keep your dignity and you be you. Don't try to be somebody for somebody else, because the mask will fall off at some point, and then that's when the miscommunication comes in and so forth. But stop trying to be a rescuer is my message. You cannot rescue anybody.
Thank you. And you mentioned that they're using you as a crutch, but if you think about it, not only if you going in as the rescuer, they are using you as a crutch, but really you are also, whether you realize it or not, using them to fulfill whatever need is in you as to why you even have this savior complex.
Right. So that's where the codependency comes in, because you're fulfilling a desire to rescue, etc., and they're obviously getting something out. But the miscommunication is, the person doesn't know that you're trying to rescue them, and that person doesn't know that they're actually fulfilling something for you. So therefore, that's where it becomes toxic. That's where you're going to get the fireworks, because neither one has communicated what the underlying desire is in this relationship, or the unspoken kind of things that they want to get from the relationship. So that's the difficulty.
Yeah. And it brings to mind this book that I read. And I know that you had mentioned in the book there was something you read that was that epiphany moment for you. And for me, several years ago, it was my cousin. She used to live in South London, but she's passed away now. We're more like sisters than cousins. I got a couple of cousins who are like that. And I think she was just tired of me coming to her with, yet again, oh my gosh, cuz, I met this guy. I think she was tired of the conversation starting with and it was the standard, oh my gosh, cuz, I met this guy. And so she let me tell her about the guy. And when I think about it, not to be disrespectful, but the guy was just trash. I should have just picked up the whole guy and thrown him away, right? Because he had lots of children with multiple, but well, I don't even know what I was doing, but I probably had the whole savior complex thing going on. And she brought me this book after I told her all about the guy, and there was the silence and then the deep sigh. She's like, and she was very cockney as well. So she's like, you know what, cuz, I've got this book for you. So I'm like, oh, okay. And she brings me this book. I still have it to this day. In fact, I've actually lent it out a couple of times myself now. And it's called Are You the One for Me? Now, by the title, you would look at it and think, okay, sounds like some romance kind of book. But actually, it's by a doctor. And it starts to talk about the reasons why people get into specific types of relationships. I had to finish the first chapter before I wanted to throw it in the bin. I wanted to throw it away because I saw myself in, I had not even finished the first chapter. And it talks about, for example, if you get into a relationship with this type of person, it's because maybe for example, people that get into relationships with somebody that has a dependency on substances. They're like, is it because you had a parent that was a substance abuser and you couldn't save them? So now you've transferred it to try and save this person. So again, going back full circle to in the beginning, mentioning relationship with parents, and now the what I like to term as the savior complex in relationships. So you saying that reminded me of this book and my cousin sharing that with me. And I tell you something, it was such an eye opener into looking at, wow, how many times have I myself felt like I was the savior, that chosen one, because I was just going to love them enough to cause them to change. And the truth is, never happened.
No.
Never loved them enough to cause them to change. I never did enough to cause them to change. And like I said, it was two things, God and or some kind of detrimental happening in their lives that actually cause them, or in this case, as you mentioned, a woman that doesn't ask too many questions and just leaves him be.
And that's an important thing that you raised there, because you can't do enough. You'll find yourself emotionally bankrupt, financially bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt if you keep investing in these types of relationships. And I think that's what driven me to, dig deep into this book, so that I know that other women will relate to what I'm saying, and they will also be given the tools to come out of that kind of cycle of trying to rescue, because you end up I had to put a full stop on it at one point and say, do you know what? Enough. This is my last year. 2018, this is my last cry, guys. I'm not crying anymore, because I need to know why. And then I had to go on my own self-discovery journey. And here I am. I would like to say I'm more confident. I'm more able to, take on relationships. I'm more able to coach women and sometimes men, because I get a lot of calls from men as well. Why is this all about women, Andra? I've had the same situation, Andra, and I'm a man. And I'm like, do you know what? I understand that. And it is for everybody. But I guess I did it for women because I'm a woman and I was relating to women at the time. But by all means, men can relate to the same kind of scenarios that are in the book. So it's not, anything.
100%, because you do have men that are in abusive relationships. You do have, what's the term that they use for men? You have henpecked men, right? So of course, and it's a case of women have been through traumatic cycles in childhood, as have men. So of course, and the book that I read, and I'll share the title with you as well. Well, am I the one for you? But the author, I need to go back and look to see who the author is. But it was so profound and can apply to your point as to men and women. And something else that you mentioned in your book, which brought something to mind. And if my mum watches this, she's probably going to burst. She's going to probably cringe and burst out laughing that I've shared this. So when you mentioned about silent compromising, now, the reason that I wanted to, I actually have a great visual of what silent compromising can look like. But please, if you can first explain to us what silent compromising is, and then I will share the visual.
Okay. So when I mention silent compromises in my book, it's like, I'm a person, not me, I'm just giving an example. I'm a person, I like hugs, I like kisses, I like that kind of intimacy. My partner does not. So I stop asking for the hugs, I stop asking for the kisses, and I'm silently compromising to his way of showing intimacy, his way of showing love, etc. So now I've taken myself, what I like and what I desire, and I've forsaken it to make him happy in the way he wants to show love. Or it can be another example, how we go out. He doesn't like going to certain places to eat, so I won't go to those places to eat. He doesn't like certain foods, so I'm not going to cook those certain foods, even though I enjoy those certain foods. But you haven't communicated that to your partner, that actually I'm compromising this because you don't like it. I'm no longer going to bring red meat into the house because you don't like it. I'm no longer going to sleep on the left side of the bed because you prefer the left side of the bed, so I'll sleep on the right. These are all silent compromises. And what tends to happen with silent compromises, they sit under the surface, and it just takes that one moment when you've had enough, that you will explode now and start saying, I do so much for you. And the person saying, well, you don't do anything for me. I can't see what you're doing for me, because as far as they're concerned, you doing the same things as them, you've got something in common. They're not seeing that it's a problem for you. They're actually saying to themselves, we're quite compatible here, because she doesn't eat the meat, she doesn't sleep on the left, she sleeps on the right, etc., etc. But actually, you're sitting there in silence, compromising all these things that you actually do enjoy for somebody who hasn't even recognized the fact that you've made such a huge sacrifice. So the minute that you get into an argument now and you tell that person you do so much for them, and they're thinking, what have you done for me? You didn't do anything for me. And this is where the silent compromises become loud and toxic.
So before I give you the visual of something you just reminded me of, so I remember I was dating this guy. So back in the day, I used to rave hard. I used to party hard. I'm talking Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday nights. I was out and I was going to work. Don't ask me how. Yeah, I don't even. Grace of God is all I can say, because wow. So, but yeah, I used to party hard. And sometimes, like, especially like on a Saturday night, we would go to the club. And then when the club finished, we found ourselves at some house party somewhere. So I'm talking raving hard. And so I met this guy. He didn't like to go out. So I continued to go out. But there was a time when I wanted him to, like, okay, I know you don't like going out, but maybe occasionally come with me. And he just would. I think he came with me once, and the way he behaved is like he had a face on him like a smack behind, I tell you, the whole night. And it just kind of ruined it for me. So I kind of stopped going out, even though it's something I really enjoyed, because a lot of my friends were going out. And the thing is, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke. So it's not like I was going out to get drunk and smoke or anything like that. It was the music, it was the vibe. And I enjoyed interacting with a lot of the people that I used to meet when going out. And I remember I started to become very resentful about that. And I was just very like standoffish towards him. So to your point about the silent compromising, like he wasn't compromising and I'm not saying he needed to come out with me the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, because now that I think about it, it was a lot. But even if he came out with me once a month or something like that, right? And then, yes, I did cut down going out, because you can't be in a relationship with somebody and you spend most of the week in somebody's club. So I did kind of cut it down. But the visual that it reminded me of, so I remember many years ago, my mum was making some food and she was making it in the pressure cooker. And then so she took the weight off and she took the lid off to check it. But when she put the lid back on, she didn't put the weight back on. And so we're there in the living room, and all of a sudden we hear this explosion. We go in the kitchen, and I'm aging myself here. And do you remember back in the day, then they used to have the thing on the wall with the hook, and it had the ladle, the spatula, and all those things. We had one right above the cooker. I remember there was a chicken leg hanging out the ladle, soup, everything, food all over the ceiling, all over the wall. And I told you, there was food everywhere. And it's because my mum forgot to put the weight back on. And when you mentioned about the silent compromising, it reminded me of that. When eventually that weight that was holding everything in, that weight's going to come off and there is going to be an explosion. Sometimes probably mammoth proportions. I mean, fortunately, this was just a literal pressure cooker and it was food, and it took us forever to clean up because, and it was when you thought you cleaned everywhere, you turn around and you see splashes of food somewhere else, right? And I say that to say the kind of damage that an explosion like that can do, because you could get into an argument and words once spoken, you can't take them back. And sometimes when we have that pressure cooker moment and we explode, and when all of the pent up frustrations come out, it can do so much hurt and damage by the words we speak because of the resentment that's built up over time, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think that's a good analogy, actually, taking the weight off. That's a really good analogy.
I tell you, when you see, I remember to this day, and this was like well over 30 years ago, because my mum left the country 30 years ago. So it was a long time ago. And to this day, I still have that vivid image, the chicken leg. And it's just interesting how the chicken leg was just perched, hanging out of the ladle that was hung up on the wall, and food everywhere, all over the place. And when we look at it and just relate that to life, and it's just, sorry, I know I kind of cut you there, but yeah, it was a vivid picture.
It is. And I think the reason why I kind of emphasize so much on silent compromises is that it's not to say that you can't compromise in a relationship, but I don't think you should be silent about it. I think we should have conversations. You know, I do like red meat, and I'm not doing it because I see that it upsets you. However, there are times when I would like to have red meat, and you know, he would have to compromise and say, okay, you should have it on Tuesdays, and I'll have something else, and I won't interfere with that. Those kind of compromises, and they're mutual ones, create the healthy relationship. It creates us being into that secure attachment that we were talking about earlier. Those are the types of things that help us to navigate our way through disagreements, because we're no longer keeping it in. We can now navigate to these healthy things where I can disagree with you and you can disagree with me, but we're going to come to a mutual ground at some point because we've communicated.
That is so true. And that's basically, we all have to compromise, because we're never going to meet somebody that likes 100% of the things we like, and vice versa, right?
Absolutely, because you know, we're all made up of different things, and we've all gone through different journeys, and all of those journeys kind of make up our character. It builds our resilience. It builds how we communicate love. So two people can maybe never ever have experienced the same exact entire journey, and even if you have, there's some people that have internal working mechanisms where they might not outwardly speak what their feelings are, and you've got another person who's gone through a similar situation to you, and they're quite extroverted and they will speak about it. So it's about coming together and having those open and honest discussions with each other about your life experiences and about where we want this relationship to go. You know, I'm looking for marriage. Are you looking for marriage? I want looking for kids. It's those open discussions, because you could fall in love with this man and he may say, oh, I don't want kids, and that's your desire to have kids, and you silently compromise not having kids because he's had all his children before, or it could be vice versa anyway. It doesn't have to be that way around. It could be the woman that doesn't want the children, and the man silently looks at a baby in a pram every time it walks past and wishes they were the one pushing the pram. These are the things that will come to head, and it's about having the open and honest question. And don't fear that you having those discussions will lead to a breakup. Sometimes it can actually bring you even closer, because you understand the person and the person understands you.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you use the example of having a baby, because it's interesting you should say that. So I remember this guy, and he was divorced. He and his wife, or he and his ex-wife, had 4 children. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, Alison, I don't want any more children. I've done it. Had done the sleepless nights. And you know, then I didn't have any children, and I wanted children. So as far as I was concerned, I thought, if I stay in this knowing full well that he doesn't want any children, I'm really just wasting both of our time.
Absolutely.
And I was grateful that I had that conversation. We both knew we wanted different things. But going back to the silent compromises, it was so fast forward, I think probably about 4 or so years, and I heard, oh, he's got a baby. And I'm like, wait, what? How? I thought you didn't want any. Listen to his response. Well, you know what you women are like. You can convince us men that we want something. And in my head, I'm like, no. Sorry, us women can convince it. And I remember I said to him, no, because just no. Because I'm the kind of person that if you say you don't want any more children, I'm going to believe that you are heavily convicted that you don't want any more children. I'm going to leave you. It's not for me to try and convince you that you want what I want. So, and when I said to him, he was just like, oh, I'm like, yeah, oh, but congratulations though. There's nothing for me to say to that, right, other than congratulations. And so it was interesting that I never back then didn't look at it as silent compromising, but that's pretty much what he did.
Absolutely. And it's so detrimental to the person who is doing all the compromising silently, and the other person is just, you know, having any regard for all of what I'm sacrificing to be in this relationship, to maintain the relationship. And I'm just saying to women and men, don't do it. Don't compromise silently. Don't do it.
Yes.
More harm than good.
Absolutely, because how do you come back from that feeling of resentment, especially if it's something that is permanent, and a permanent reminder that you compromised? And I'm not saying that he regretted having his child. That is absolutely not what I'm saying, because I don't believe he did. But it's also a case of, it just goes to show that for many years he was adamant in that. And if it was something I believe, if it was something he really wanted, he wouldn't have explained it to me in that way. Well, you know what you women are like, kind of thing. I think it would have been more oh yeah, you know something. As time went on, I realized, yeah, I did. So and it was, the tell for me was in how he explained it. Like, yeah, that was a compromise that you probably weren't too happy about, but it's done. Your child is here. Congratulations. As much as I was being sarcastic at the time with the congratulations, I actually did mean because I just like, you know what? I wish them all the best, wish them all well. And hopefully that actually helps strengthen and solidify things with them. But in all of this, and you've mentioned it before about the 5 love languages. Now, I've read the book many years ago, and knowing, and I think that's something that is so important, that knowing about the 5 love languages. Now, many people may not know what they are. So real quick, I will say the 5 love languages are acts of service. For those kind of people, actions speak louder than words. And then you have receiving of gifts. People like to receive gifts. People like to give gifts. Quality time, words of affirmation, and physical touch. Now, those are the 5 love languages. Some people just have one. Some people have a little bit of all of them. Some people have a couple and things like that. But in the book, you mentioned the 5 languages and knowing what yours is before you can know how to love another. Now, reading the book and learning that many times it's like we love others based on what our love language is. So, for
Absolutely.
example,
Wanting to get across in the book.
yeah. So, for example, um, I remember there was a friend of mine, and I would always say nice things to him. And he was very uncomfortable with that. And I remember him saying it. And I'm just like, but what's wrong with me saying nice things about you and highlighting all the positive aspects of yourself? But he was really uncomfortable with that. And I just thought, hold on a second, step back. You are actually loving somebody from your own love language, because this is actually, rather than it in being endearing to him, it was actually pushing him away because it made him uncomfortable. So basically speaking, to speak in different love languages, and then you're wondering why communication is a challenge or a struggle, because it's almost like, say, I speak French and I don't speak any Spanish. You speak Spanish and you don't speak any French, and then we're wondering why we can't communicate, right?
Yeah. But I think the love languages can be very complex as well, because you touched on something just there. If I'm a person who I believe physical touch is a way of somebody saying that they love me, and that person who's giving me the physical touch, that's not a love language for them. That's something how they are with everybody. Right away, you've fallen into this conception that this person loves you, when actually they're being physically affectionate as that's their normal way, they're touchy feely. So you've got to be very careful with love languages. And that's why sometimes it does take you to have, the coaching sessions. It takes you to have that one-to-one, with your partner, to get to know their love language, in order that it's not miscommunicated.
I
Because then,
like that.
yeah, because I wouldn't want to, give words of affirmation. Oh, you look really nice today. You look really good in that hat, blah, blah, blah. And then you're thinking, oh, he's really attracted to me. But that's what he does even when he sees somebody at the train station. Do you know what I mean? So we've got to be very careful about how we interpret love language. But it's a good tool to have, and it's a good starting point, but it can become complex if you don't understand what's being communicated to you. May not be related, may not be how you communicate love, but it's how somebody's just communicating, how they're friendly.
That is true. That's a good point. Yeah. And also, again, knowing what your love language is, knowing what it is that makes you feel loved and appreciated, and being able to respect that in other people. So yeah,
Yes.
that's a good point. So Andra, so regarding your journey of healing and breaking free from negative cycles, like, so what was the thing that caused you to take stock and wanted to break that? I know you said that you heard a song in 2018, but
Yeah.
in addition to hearing that song in 2018, what was it that was in you, that driving force and factor that made you not just stop, hear that song and think, oh my gosh, what is love, but made you actually do the work to get on your journey to healing and breaking free from the negative cycles of these abusive and toxic relationships that you've been in?
I would have to say quite openly that it's my faith. My faith grew stronger. My relationship with God became stronger. I started to understand that, there were certain situations that he was taking me from. It was him who ended it. It was him who caused that breakup, caused that walking away, caused that, disruption and all the madness and everything, because he never assigned that person to me. It was me understanding my relationship with God and understanding how he communicates with me, that I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna put the brakes on, and I'm gonna allow you to find that person for me. I'm gonna allow you to heal me how I should have been healed. Yes, I was baptized, and some of these things have occurred to me during that time, but now my understanding is that those men were never sent to me. It was me who was seeking them out. And I think that's what caused me to really sit back and say, okay, this was never for you, and you need to stop. And I stopped.
Wow. Wow, that's That is so true. There's so many times we've gotten into relationships, be it a man or a woman, that we've gotten into relationships that we know that, what was this? This was not for me, but because this, especially people that they really want to be married and have that family and have that home life. Sometimes the people are so desperate for it that they will settle with the first thing that could potentially even look like it.
Absolutely.
That's wow. Thank you so much. And so I know you said it was your faith, but is there anything specific that you did in doing the work on yourself? Did you, for example, did you go and seek counseling, or was it just books you read? So what did that work for you actually look like?
For me, it was definitely the books I read. It was the research. It was looking at the attachment styles. It was identifying the blueprint. It was actually opening up and having conversations with my family about some of the things. Some of the things they don't even know about until they've read the book. And it was about having those discussions, those open and honest discussions. It was about speaking to my daughter. It was about speaking to my mom. It was about, who is Andra? Who is Andra? What do you want? It was doing that kind of work. In fact, it's such a taboo, and I want to really break that taboo today, is not seeking counseling. I think we should if it's needed. And for a long time, because of me being a professional, I felt it was a sign of weakness to go and seek help through professional counseling or coaching. And I think that was a real barrier for me in kind of fast forwarding my kind of healing journey. Because I remember saying even to my mum one time, I said, I think I need a counselor. And she's like, you don't need a counselor. Why would you need a counselor? And it shut it all down.
Yeah.
So there are some very good digital CBT kind of things that you can do online, like cognitive behavioral therapy, digital. If you don't really want to have that one-to-one, start your journey by looking at those kind of resources in terms of understanding your behavior, understanding how your thoughts become actions. And that was one of the tools that I had to look. How did I think about this? And I'm here. So that's where cognitive behavior therapy kind of helped me in terms of understanding the behavior, understanding the thought, and then moving on from it.
Thank you. And for anyone that's at that crossroads where, like yourself, you came to that crossroad in 2018, but for anyone that's at that crossroads and realizing that, this is it. This is the time for me to get out of that abusive, toxic relationship, or this is the time for me to, and even if you're not in an abusive or toxic relationship, but you feel like you're ready for one, to make sure that you prepare yourself so that you go into the next relationship healed, healthy, and whole. So what would you say to them that, they need the help that they need and they don't know where to turn? What would you say to somebody that's at that crossroads?
You see, that's a very difficult question. And I'll say that it's difficult because, one, being a relationship coach, you kind of work with the couples. So it's about what is the danger here? What is the issues here that we need to address? Because you moving out of that relationship, you may just be transferring the problem, or that abuse will be transferring that problem to somebody else. Is there anything in that relationship that can be fixed? Now, obviously, if it's a detrimental situation where your safety is compromised, absolutely, you need to get out. There were situations where I could have died, I could have been killed, and I had to get out. And I know that it was the hand of God that had moved me out. But I'm saying to any woman today that if you are in a situation where your life is actually a threat, and your children's lives are a threat, then what you need to do is seek professional help. Sometimes seeking help within the community or your family will be more damaging, because they will see that person as this nice guy, or you could work on it, or there might be something you can do, or anything. I would say seek professional help. because sometimes it's going to take that person on the outside to really understand the fear that you're in, understanding the danger. Because a lot of the times, if you go to the mother-in-law is just going to see their son. They're not going to see a perpetrator. They're not going to see him with a knife in his hand, or the bruises on your face, or etc. Like, but a professional who's outside of the box would be able to guide you, will be able to put a safety plan in place, will be able to coach you into that safety, especially if it's safe enough to do so. And if there is work that can be done, it can be done. But I would say my own personal opinion is to seek professional help.
Yes, thank you. And not only that, one of the other things that seeking professional help can provide you is with a ton of resources that are
Absolutely.
available. Because a lot of the times we don't know what's available. We don't know what's out there until you do seek that help, and they have access to be able to give you all of those resources. Thank you so much, Andra. And one of the things in reading your book, and especially when you look at how you get into relationships, and I know that from my own experience, this has happened to me, where gotten into a relationship and I was just thinking, wow, this is all that I've ever dreamed of and ever wanted. And fast forward probably about a year, as you mentioned, that mask that was so firmly in place fell all the way off, and I saw the real person behind it. And it was just like, wow. And what came to mind in reading your book, it's like you could be with someone all day, every day, and still not know who they are, and still not know what's going on the inside of them. That could be in the relationship sense. That could even be with a family member, because you mentioned some of your family members didn't even know what was going on until they read the book.
Exactly. And some of my family members haven't read the book, which they have said to me, oh, I wouldn't want to read, you being hurt or anything like that. But I just want to put it out there that the book is not all doom and gloom. It's actually quite one of hope, and it's one that looks at the positive sides to relationships as well as my own journey. I'm sharing my journey with you, but I'm not saying that that's going to mirror anybody's journey, or it's actually going to be a damper. I'm actually saying you could have that sister who was in that situation. It may not be you. You could have that friend. You could have that colleague that was in my situation. What could you do to help? What could you do to recognize the signs? So it's not all just about abuse. It's also about healthy cycles. It's about, appreciating the relationship that you're in, growing that relationship that you're in, promoting that relationship that you're in. So it's not always about the breaking up. It's also about the rescuing of something. Something brought you together. So let's see if we can work on those things that brought you together, if it's safe to do so.
Thank you, Andra. I appreciate that. This has been quite a pleasure to speak to you on these topics and learning some things for myself. And hopefully those listening have learned something as well. And if they're going through something, if they know someone else is going through something, giving them hope that, like you said, it's not all doom and gloom, and help is out there, help's available. So thank you, Andra. And just before we go, tell us, so what's next for you? What are you working on? I know that you have your book, I Want to Know What Love Is, but where can people buy your book? Have you got any more projects in the pipeline? What's happening for you?
I've got so many projects in the pipeline. I can hardly scream about them. So basically, the first project is my No Woman Left Behind project. And I want to recognize that all types of women suffer from abuse, professionals, next door neighbors, you name it. And I don't want any woman to suffer in silence. And I also want to help women on their healing journey. So we've got therapeutic retreats coming up. And it's where they'll have the opportunity to come on a weekender where they will have counselors on site to help them on their journey, to kickstart the journey. There'll be group sessions. I've got a workbook going on at the moment, The Things You Love That Don't Love You Back. I've got so many kind of ideas that I want to just help women to come onto their healing journey, to help them find their healthy, successful relationships. But firstly, I want them to work on them. You know, the relationship will always come. The relationship will always be there. There will always be somebody for you. But what I want is when you look in the mirror, you see that healthy person who deserves love, who can give love and can receive love. That's one of my first projects. And then I also want to work with the youths as well who are being exploited, because I did experience some kind of grooming when I was growing up, and I want to make sure that I help both boys and girls or young people to kind of recognize the signs of being groomed and also have professional mentors available for them as part of the project as well. Also, alongside that, as you know, I'm doing relationship and singles coaching. I have my website, www.andralove.com. And I've also, my book is on that website as well as Amazon. So there's lots coming in the future, and my website will be updated in terms of when we're having these programs. We're having master classes as well. So all of that will be coming in the new year, well, towards the end of the year, Black History Month as well. You can also find me on Andra Love Inc. on Instagram. That's my Instagram page and also my TikTok page. So do like and follow. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And you mentioned that people can find you on your website, which is www.andralove.com.
Yes.
Wonderful. Andra, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to and excited for all the things that are coming next for you. And I thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for having the courage and the vulnerability to share your journey, to share your story with us. So Andra, thank you so much for joining us on Conversations with Alison J, The Journey to Here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.